Well, friends, thanks so much for tuning in. I just want to start by saying that I think this may be one of the most important conversations I've ever had about anything with anyone. Share it with your friends, your colleagues, anyone you care about, because my guest today is Dane Wigington, and he runs the site geoengineeringwatch.org. One of my readers, John S., sent me a video presentation that Dane did recently called Engineered Drought Catastrophe, Target California. And it truly moved me and really left me disturbed by what we're seeing. Dane Wigington is with us right now. Dane, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for your willingness to address this issue that not enough people know about yet.
Well, it's hard to know even where to get started on this issue because it's so big, but you're the expert, as we talked about just prior to getting started here. The geoengineering concept or subject matter is a little bit outside of my normal wheelhouse. I woke up to the idea of what the powers that be want to do to us through the weather, through the 1996 Air Force document, Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025, which spells out exactly what they intended to do, what they wanted to do, and what they are doing. And if we take a look at the table of contents in that document, we see concept of operations, precipitation, fog, storms, exploitation of near space for space control, opportunities afforded by space weather modification, communications dominance via ionospheric modification, and that leads us into HAARP, which we'll talk about in this interview, artificial weather, and they wanted to know how do they get there from here. Well, they got there, folks, and Dane's going to tell us all about it. Of course, that document came out in 1996. We're having this conversation in 2014 as we see an epic drought in the American Southwest, a drought so bad that by some accounts, if Lake Mead falls by another 7%, Nevada will be cut off completely because Nevada gets 90% of its water from Lake Mead. This conversation could not be more timely, especially since there is a global march against chemtrails and geoengineering happening on the 27th, the day we're having this conversation. Dane, where would you like to start? Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how you woke up to this issue.
Well, you mentioned off the air, Sean, that you were skeptical at first, and I understand that because I was as well. And even I have a background in renewable energy with Bechtel Power Corporation. I know that's a four-letter word now, like Halliburton. I left the company because of moral issues. I didn't like what I saw. I left at a very young age. But that being my background, I moved to the Pacific Northwest into the wilderness, expecting to find clean air. I'm completely off the grid. My home is on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. And as I began to settle into my off-grid home, I was noting that I was losing on certain days, sometimes 60, 70%, and sometimes higher, of my solar PV uptake from whatever these aircraft were leaving behind in the sky, virtual grid patterns on certain days. This is in 2001. And I knew something was going on. I mean, clearly there was some sort of unnatural activity. It was not commercial routes, was not commercial directional traffic. So as I began to dig into research, I was astounded at the amount of data I found on climate engineering, known as stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, solar radiation management. I researched the patents for this activity. I found the primary elements, and I began to test my precipitation. I did not want to find what I found in my rain. I hoped that there was something I was missing, that perhaps this material was not falling on us, but it was there. And from an initial rain test of 7 parts per billion of aluminum, which is high given our filtered forested location in the Pacific Northwest, subsequent rain tests, Sean, over the next 5 years, the aluminum escalated as much as almost 50,000%, up to 3,450 parts per billion in a single rain. This is highly toxic rain. These materials are not coming from China. They are the primary elements in geoengineering patents. I mean, every single dot connects, and I was faced to abandon any skepticism. Clearly, these programs were going on, and I've been at the battle ever since for over 10 years.
Well, it's frightening on multiple levels because there still is so much denial. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the term chemtrails versus maybe the more scientific acceptable term, which those who are doing this use themselves, which is geoengineering. And the reason I want to talk about that is that one of the most popular podcasters out there, comedian Joe Rogan, I like the guy. I think he's really funny. He's very intelligent, and he does care about humanity. But he does like to make fun of this issue because he thinks through his show, Joe Rogan Questions Everything, he's figured this issue out, and he thinks that chemtrails are just condensation trails from jetliners. And after I watched your presentation, Engineered Drought Catastrophe Target California, it's absolutely undeniable, especially when you take into account the documents that I've cited. We can talk about John Holdren's own testimony about geoengineering and his role in it. We can talk about the facts of the matter, because I cannot emphasize enough that Joe Rogan is wrong on this issue. And being that he lives in California, and being that he has such a great platform to share information, I challenge Joe Rogan to have Dane Wigington on his program for 3 hours to talk about this issue, because there is nobody out there doing a better job talking about it than Dane Wigington. Frame up for us, what is the best way to talk about this to others so they understand the science behind it? Because geoengineering is real. So what is it, and why are they doing it?
Geoengineering, or solar radiation management, is the intentional disbursement of light scattering reflected particles, aluminum is a primary element, throughout the globe. The intended purpose is to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal radiation to slow a runaway greenhouse effect. Now, the actual fallout or consequences of these programs appear to be creating a worsened warming. No surprise, when you hamper the natural systems, you don't get good results. In regard to Joe Rogan, he seems like a likable guy, but it's unfortunate he has marginalized this issue. And the chemtrails term is the term that the power structure wants people to use, because it leads straight to conspiracy theory and hoax. If you Google this term, people come to a dead end, and that's by design. That term cannot be changed on Wikipedia. In fact, I know people with the Union of Concerned Scientists that have tried to modify the Wikipedia definition to make clear that this is the layman's term for solar radiation management, but they will not allow that to happen. They want that to say conspiracy theory. So again, semantics are very, very important. If you use the science terms, solar radiation management, climate engineering, or geoengineering, you'll come to hard science, and people will find data to back this issue up. So on Joe Rogan's show that he did on this issue, I was called and was scheduled to be interviewed, but I made clear to Joe Rogan and his staff that I would not sign off on any edit unless I saw it first, and that was enough to keep them from coming. I had a feeling where they were going with that show, and so I opted out. But I hope he reconsiders his position, because the gravity of this issue, Sean, is absolutely immense. I did not pick this issue. I'm not politically oriented. I've never been an activist. But when you can't walk out your door and breathe without sucking this stuff into your lungs, when it's contaminating everything on the planet, from the clouds to the ground, and we have science, peer-reviewed science study to back this up, we have a fight on our hands, and a fight of the greatest magnitude. So I chose this issue because, quite simply, if we don't deal with this, the simple fact that we're all absorbing this into our systems, it's affecting our cognitive ability. What other challenge can we face if we're not thinking clearly? I mean, this is affecting virtually everything, including our neurological systems. The human organism is very, very damaged by these heavy metals, and we have the science to back that up.
Well, and I want to play a clip of you speaking here in your presentation, Engineered Drought Catastrophe Target California. But before I do that, I want to just circle back and say that Joe Rogan should have you on his 3-hour podcast, which runs live and is uninterrupted and unedited. I can vouch for that. I listen to them regularly. I know that that's the case. We don't need you on his show. We're not even sure if his show is going to be picked up again, but we don't need you on an edited 30-minute show where you get to speak for 30 seconds. We need you in a 3-hour dialogue with Joe Rogan. So again, I challenge Joe Rogan to have you on his podcast as soon as possible to address this issue from a science-based standpoint. Now, guys, here's Dane summarizing how dire the situation is, because those of us who are on the side of liberty, those of us who are on the side of truth, those of us who are on the side of humanity, know that the powers that be are manipulating their resources, our resources, and manipulating the environment, the money system, science and technology against the people as they build out a police state, as they build out autonomous robots for their military, as they build out HARP, which we're going to talk about up in Alaska, an ionospheric manipulation system that Dane is pretty much an expert on. But what I want to do right now is I want to play this clip, which summarizes in Dane's words what we're up against.
If the lack of moisture over us continues, I think we all know what's coming. So at this point, no matter what we do in the ground to try to exercise our rights, if they have that kind of power over us, if they can shut off our water, if they can toxify our air and soils, it's going to be game over if it continues. But the bottom line is these maps are completely unprecedented. You don't see this kind of stuff on CNN. These are NOAA maps, by the way. And by the way, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who does their mapping? Raytheon.
Who does NOAA's mapping? Raytheon. It all ties together in this secret government that we talk about so much, the secret government that really the Federal Reserve System, the central bankers were allowed to create through their fiat Ponzi system. So this all ties together. Dane's point could not be a better point, which is if they can do this to us, if they can put us in an engineered drought catastrophe, if they can turn off the water, if they can toxify our air, our water, our land, if they can put metals into our bodies as they're doing with aluminum, barium, strontium, copper, manganese, if they can do these things to us, it's game over. So I'm very passionate about it because your presentation really awoke me, and I want everybody to watch it. Engineered Drought Catastrophe, Target California. So let's talk about those NOAA maps now. Can you tell us, Dane, how are they manipulating the climate, the low pressure systems, the high pressure systems, to create these polar vortexes over the Midwest, which is where I live, and to create simultaneously the hottest drought conditions that we've ever seen in the American Southwest? How are they doing this?
There's a number of aspects to the major components of the weather modification. As they saturate the atmosphere with these reflective light scattering materials, these are also conductive materials. So the atmosphere is becoming much more conductive. In regards to HAARP, most people have heard that term, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. The acronym is not so clear, but the bottom line is, as you correctly described, Sean, it's an ionosphere heater. And there is not just one HAARP facility. There's at least 24 large ground-based facilities around the globe, an unknown number of SBX, sea-based X-band radar. It looks like a massive golf ball on top of an oil derrick. So there's an unknown number of these ionosphere heaters around the globe that work in unison. And they can, even publicized military data indicates clearly that they can heat the ionosphere hundreds of square miles up to 15,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now this happens because in the case of HAARP, HAARP can beam 3.5 billion watts, billion with a B, into the ionosphere. And this causes an electrical chain reaction. Now people would ask, why would anybody want to do this? But I would answer, why would anybody want to detonate 2,000 plus nuclear bombs or build enough nuclear weaponry to exterminate life on Earth 12,000 times over? Mathematically, we're not dealing with sanity. So these ionosphere heaters can manipulate the jet stream, which manipulates the weather patterns. You see the whole meteorological community stating on the record they have no idea what's making the jet stream do what it's doing because they're ignoring the elephant in the room. They are absolutely unable to talk about the climate engineering issue. They have no First Amendment protection in the case of government scientists. So we have this complete manipulation of Earth's weather system going on while everybody's pretending it's not happening. In the case of the polar vortexes, as you mentioned, there's not enough cold air around at this point for them to cool the entire country at once. So you see half of it frying while the other half freezes, and the majority of that has been the west frying and the eastern U.S. below normal temperatures. Now, we've had a bit of a reversal of that. It looks like they're going to cool the west down a bit, and the temperatures are going to go much higher in the east. And I give an example of this. Going back 2 weeks, we had record cold and record snow in several states. Montana was one. And I'm posting on this morning with my weekly weather update. So around September 10th, 11th, we had record cold, record snow in Montana, temperatures down in some places to the teens. Montana has just shattered heat records several days ago with temperatures pushing 100 degrees. We go back another year, Amarillo, Texas, May 1st, 2013, 100 degrees on the ground, all-time record high. It snowed the next day on May 2nd. Now, people should understand these events are anything but natural. So with the combined efforts of the HAARP ionosphere heaters, the ground-based ionosphere heaters, seeding the atmosphere with the reflective particles which reflects the sun, and also artificial chemical ice nucleation. This is a chemical process that can turn what should have been a rainstorm into a snowstorm. It causes a cold layer on the ground, creates some headlines, some temperature records, highly toxic, very shallow layer of cold. And we know this is going on. We've had the Chinese government admit on the record that they were creating artificial snowstorms over Beijing. People can look this up. I encourage people to look up anything, everything I say. If you Google Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms, you'll find mainstream media covered this, where they created several chemically nucleated snowstorms over Beijing. The third one caused $1 billion in damage, at which time they started to be more covert about their programs. But this is just business as usual, Sean, not just for the U.S. and NATO powers, but for the Chinese and Russian governments. So everybody's paying weather whack-a-mole, and a tug-of-war with the weather system, and we will all pay the price if it continues.
Well, my head is spinning because there's so many questions I have, and again, not being an expert in this area, it makes it a little difficult. So let me just throw out a couple of things. You talked about the combination of the spraying with HARP-type facilities to manipulate the weather, and it leads me to believe that there may be an ulterior motive for the spraying, because they're putting so much toxicity into the air that any generalist like me in this area could conclude that there's got to be more to the story than trying to block the sun and the sun's radiation to reflect the sun's radiation. It really makes no sense, because as you note in your presentation, what they do by creating these artificial clouds is they then trap the sun's radiation, and they actually make the earth hotter, which is really terrifying, again, as we talk about this drought. Now, because of you, Dane, we posted a piece that I found on my own, again, because I was inspired by your presentation, HARP in Action. I call it Ensuring Endless Drought, but you guys can find this piece from the HARP report on YouTube. HARP in Action, Ensuring Endless Drought, North Pacific Low Pressure Killed, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. And it's very compelling, because as these storms, as these weather participation possibilities form in the Pacific and move towards California, we see them fall apart before the precipitation is ever allowed to happen in California. And it's really terrifying, because it brings me back to the conclusion, Dane, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think you're on the same page here. It seems to me they're trying to do this on purpose to bring the American people to their knees, because if you don't have water, you can't make food. If you don't have food, you're hungry. And if all those things are true, you're completely controllable. It's game over, as you say. So I think Target California is absolutely correct. As you note in your presentation, this is not about cloud seeding to create rain. It's about creating artificial toxic cloud cover. Feel free to run with any of that.
You're correct all the way around, Sean. First, the American population, still an unfortunately high number of them, try to make themselves believe that such programs are for the common good. This could not be further from the truth. These programs are about power and control. They always have been. There's no benevolence in them, period. So when people ask if they can make it rain, why don't they make it rain over California? That's not their goal. The goal is one of many goals. As you also correctly stated, there's not just one or two agenda items being carried out here. There are many, some of which we can know, others we can't know. So in the case of California, California is in some ways a climate sacrifice zone, in other ways a target. So we see, as they have hampered the weather system so radically, and the weather system is unraveling by the day, then they continue to ramp up the programs to try to hide or mitigate the damage they already did from these programs to begin with. I'm not saying these programs are the only source of damage to the climate, but mathematically they are the single greatest. So when we see the Kelvin wave that rose this spring, the El Nino building, this was the most powerful Kelvin wave yet seen on the planet. Immediately, the long-term forecast for California was changed. The next day, after that data came out, high pressure was even more aggressively entrenched over the state. This changes the trade winds. This pushes the warm water that was building for El Nino back to the West Pacific to bottle it up in the ocean even longer. And so we see that there are very large goals being carried out that relate to the weather, relate to trying to mitigate the damage already done by increasing the intensity of these programs. That's one aspect. We also see aspects that seem to relate to the methane releasing in the Arctic right now, which is a global cataclysm that the media is not telling us about. We see other aspects of California's situation that seem to relate to what the geoengineers are trying to do in the Arctic. Now, again, that's only one aspect. California as a climate sacrifice zone. Two, we see weather systems coming over California carrying moisture, and they will not let those systems drop rain. We see them blown apart again and again and again. And the HARP report, good people there. They're doing a great job. I'm very glad to have them in this issue helping us. So we see simply too many cases where the geoengineers will not let it rain, and they can block it two ways. They can increase the high pressure, which keeps the storm fronts from even coming near us, or they can aerosolize the moisture that comes across us. So once moisture is actually moving across a state, if it is saturated with too many particulates, too many condensation nuclei, that causes the moisture to migrate past us. And we see that again and again. We have it on satellite imagery. We're not guessing. We know they're doing this. So they are, for all practical purposes, shutting off our moisture. So as you correctly said again, Sean, multiple agenda items being carried out all at once, none of them for the common good overall, and all of them completely decimating Earth's natural life support systems.
Now, circling back to your presentation and the mention of El Nino, the El Nino weather system, which you just mentioned a minute ago, you mentioned in your presentation, and you remind us that the NOAA maps are provided by Raytheon. And when NOAA came out and said, El Nino will not bring rain this time, you ask, how could they possibly know that? How could they possibly know what the weather's going to do before the weather does it? Because they control the weather. And I just think the point needs to be made as we talk about fascism so often on my channel and my work. Raytheon is the government. Raytheon in bed with NOAA, in bed with the U.S. government, that is the very definition of fascism. When corporations and government work together to control the people, that's Mussolini's definition of fascism. So these are my words, not Dane's, but I just don't think there's a better example of fascism than the FDA and Monsanto, than Raytheon and NOAA. The list goes on, as listeners well know. Now, let me ask you this, Dane. For those who would look up into the sky, for the Joe Rogans of the world who would say, you're out of your mind, that's just condensation coming out of a jet, right? They've been doing it since I was a kid. That's all it is. You note in your presentation that high bypass turbofan jet engines, which are basically on all tankers and all commercial carriers now, with those types of engines, 80% of the air that passes through those engines is non-combusted, and the engine by design is almost incapable of making any trail. What I want you to do is address for critics, talk briefly about what's coming out of some of these military aircraft. You have pictures, you have video. Tell us how you know that they're actually spraying.
First, I want to say, Sean, you are completely on top of the subject, and I appreciate that very, very much. You've obviously done a lot of homework here, and that's extremely helpful to our cause. In regard to the condensation issue, there's a hoax regarding this whole subject, and that hoax is this, that there is condensation at all coming out of these aircraft in most cases. That's the hoax. So when we have up-close footage of these aircraft spraying at altitude, turning on and off, that's the end of the argument. There's nothing else to discuss. For those who want the truth, we have the truth on film. We have KC-10s, military tankers, KC-135s, military tankers, C-17 Globemaster, another military tanker. We have all these aircraft on film, up close, from behind, at altitude, turning on and off. In some cases, the nozzle is actually visible. Absolutely, positively no way anybody can rationally call this a condensation trail. We see aircraft fly over. Frequently, it's the big tankers that have misaligned nozzles. So you'll see one plume veering off out to the side and coming back in. Now, anybody rationally would think, well, obviously the jet engine is not mounted crooked. That's obviously not condensation. We have, in Northern California, spraying at night is not common unless they are really trying to build the high pressure and actually create heat. As you correctly stated also earlier, Sean, these particulates trap heat. And there are times when they try to build the heat. They're trying to build the high pressure. And so we see them spraying at night sometimes, but not often. So typically, if you see a grid pattern during the daytime, if you come out at night, in the Pacific Northwest at least, you'll see aircraft leaving nothing in the middle of night when they were leaving horizon-to-horizon trails in the daytime. If this was anything to do with condensation, you would see something larger at night because there's cooler temperatures and even higher humidity. We have footage of these aircraft, again, shutting on and off. We have too many reels of this to even mention. The material that's coming down in the ground, obviously matching the patents. Again, when you have film footage of the crime, the argument's over for anybody who really want the truth. And I encourage people to go to our website, look at these films. They're there. So the notion that this is condensation is absolutely ridiculous. And when you have film of the crime happening, the argument should be over at that point.
Yeah, and you mentioned the website. That's geoengineeringwatch.org, maybe one of the most important alternative websites in the world today. You mentioned patents. Let's talk about that. There's over 150 patents, which you mentioned in your presentation, patents assigned to the Department of Defense. And in addition to that, you cite a patent, oxides of metal patent, assigned to Hughes Aircraft in 1991. Let's talk about the patents.
We do have that many patents, about 150, and they're assigned to everybody from DoD, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. To back up a little bit on what you said earlier, this sort of fascist scenario we have, we mentioned that Raytheon does all the weather modeling for NOAA. They also do the weather modeling for the National Weather Service, so you have the weather makers telling us what the scheduled weather is. This is the foxes running the hen houses. We have Lockheed Martin, is doing all the weather modeling for the FAA. Lockheed Martin also up to their neck in weather modification programs. So this whole system has been set up for a very, very long time in a manner that indicates they felt they could continue to play God with the weather indefinitely. And that is clearly not the case. The consequences are now becoming absolutely horrific, enough so that all life on Earth is at risk. But when we look back, a 1966 document I found on the NASA archives, 80 pages long presidential document outlining the scope and scale of the weather mod programs in the U.S. as of that time, budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars, 10 federal agencies involved, 12 major universities involved. And so we have historical precedent. We know these programs existed. On the patents, we have, for example, I mentioned the artificial ice nucleation for weather modification, i.e. to create a snowstorm out of what should have been a rainstorm, or to further cool a snowstorm to lower the temperatures even more. We have patents for this going back to 1950. So they've been at this for that long in this regard. And what do we see in the snowstorm arena, Sean? What do we see last year? We saw the same places hit again and again and again. So over 80 degrees in California, we're seeing snow in other parts of the country, and we see a certain transition. We see an ice storm transition between what the Weather Channel, and by the way, the Weather Channel, Rothschild's owned Weather Channel, they've bought up all the private, formerly more publicly oriented weather dissemination agencies to also control the message. But we have paid actors on the Weather Channel now telling us that it's normal to have a warm side and a cold side to a winter storm, to have an ice storm transition area between the, quote, warm side and the cold side as the chemical nucleation agents are beginning to set up and cool down part of the storm. We have the whole message being controlled right now. The whole system is being controlled. And the American population has, at least so far, unfortunately, apathetically accepted whatever they're told, that it's normal for it to snow at 45 degrees. We're seeing this. We have the screenshots of the temperatures in various areas of snow falling at 45, 50 degrees. People should use their sense of reason. This is anything but natural. And we have, if people Google engineered snowstorms, Sean, they will find we have lab tests showing how powerful these chemical and biological nucleating agents are. It can freeze water in a vessel in a lab in a second, literally. You can turn the whole vessel upside down with chemically nucleating agents in it. So we have the proof of these particular programs being carried out, and the degree to which the weather is being modified right now is beyond what most people can yet comprehend. But if they do the investigation, they'll find the data is there to back it up, that our weather is being manipulated from top to bottom. The consequences will be total if it continues.
You talk about paid actors on the Weather Channel. You talk about the Rothschilds. We talk a lot about the Mockingbird mainstream media and the CIA agenda to control the media in this nation under Operation Mockingbird, which I think they rolled out in the 60s and bragged about. They're still very much in control today. Anybody who watches CNN or Fox News, for that matter, knows that to be true. Let's talk about meteorologists. Why won't they talk about this issue? I think I know what the answer is, Dane, and I'll cite meteorologist Paul Douglas, a very popular meteorologist, TV personality from the Minneapolis area. Back in 2010, he started to talk about chemtrails, urban legend or valid concern, and he wanted to discuss the issue. He's no longer with that station. Why won't meteorologists take this on?
It's a very bad career decision, as you already outlined. We had North State Radio, it's the major radio stations in Northern California, tried to get a meteorologist to publicly debate me on the air. They tried 6 major media stations, And one of them was a Channel 7 station, a ABS affiliate in Northern California. A meteorologist there finally accepted out of about a half a dozen they tried, and she was terminated 2 days later. Now, I can't say for certain that that's why, but the timing was interesting, and obviously it seems to be a very bad career decision. We were told by a Fox News meteorologist off the air that they're being taken into meetings and told, you do not touch this issue. So again, bad career decision, whether you're a meteorologist, whether you're a pilot. This is simply not what you do if you want to keep your job. And we know that those who print the money, everybody asks, who's paying for all this? How do they have all this control? That question is asked by people who, I know you understand this, but that question is asked by people who don't yet understand that the central banks are controlling everything, funding the universities, funding the states. They fund everything. They control the purse strings for everyone down the ladder with any agencies or governmental anything. So they have quite a muzzle around the entire system at the moment. I've been told by a NOAA scientist off the record, quote, "We know about these programs. We're alarmed as hell. We don't know what to do. We have no First Amendment protection." I was told that to my face, Sean.
Well, it's shocking, but it's not surprising, because those of us who know that that is what fascism is, and that's what fascism does, is it shuts down free speech, it shuts down dialogue, it shuts down critical thinking. That's the goal of those that control, the powers that shouldn't be. And just circling back quickly to Paul Douglas in his article, I just want to read this quick blurb that he wrote before he left that station. What in the world are they spraying? He says, "I found a link that has the entire documentary here. It runs 97 minutes, and before you dismiss it out of hand as quackery or worse, take a few minutes and check it out. It is the most eye-opening thing you will see all month. Paranoia on a mass scale? Possibly, but people all around the world are seeing strange things in the sky. Levels of aluminum, barium, and other heavy metals have spiked in snowpack, soil, and water samples. I'm not as quick to dismiss this as I was before watching the documentary. After all, we did spray in the past attempting to modify weather. Cloud seeding during the Vietnam War was common, trying to increase flooding over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, carrying supplies from the North Vietnamese. And then there was this whole Agent Orange thing. I hope there's nothing to this, but in the spirit of full disclosure, I wanted to share it with you and let you reach your own conclusion. The man was just trying to do the job of a real journalist, and he's no longer with that station. This is why people won't speak out. This is why fascism is such a powerful tool, because if they can control the corporations, they can control your job. They can also control your speech. I want to talk about solutions. There's nobody out there trying harder than you to get the message out and to try to take action. In fact, I know from your presentation that you also presented this data to Gavin Newsom at the California State Capitol. Gavin Newsom was the 42nd mayor of San Francisco, and he is the lieutenant governor of California currently. And it's a small world because I happen to know who Gavin Newsom is. I've never met the man, but I don't live in California, and I still know who he is because I also listen to a little podcast from Adam Carolla, and Adam Carolla has had Gavin Newsom on his show. And if you ever want to Google a funny snippet, Google Adam Carolla bashing Gavin Newsom, because he had Gavin on to talk about economics, the state of affairs in California, and all he could get out of Gavin Newsom was bureaucratic double talk and doublethink. He couldn't get a straight answer. There was no common sense solutions to any of the problems in California from Gavin Newsom. So tell us about your visit with Gavin Newsom as you tried to present this information to him.
I had a meeting in the Capitol with Gavin and his top aide. I presented satellite data imagery and a lot of other data. There's absolutely no question in my mind that they fully understood and fully accepted the legitimacy of this issue at that meeting. But as you correctly stated, they are much too comfortable in their job to rock the boat. So long as they can stay in that position, they will continue to do exactly nothing. Even though we have California EPA on the record now, I have these records and just presented them to a U.S. Congressman, Doug Malfa, admitting to aluminum running in our waterways now in Northern California, and they don't know the source. So, and again, presenting this to Congressman Doug LaMalfa, same results. They don't care. They're part of the system. They've been bought, sold, and paid for. And the only way we will bring this issue to light is to raise public awareness to critical mass, period. And to outline for your listeners again, Sean, why is this issue so important? Why is this issue, if one looks rationally at all the factors involved, the most critical and immediate threat we face, short of nuclear catastrophe. It's thwarting the hydrological cycle. It's shredding the ozone layer, period. We have the science to back that up. We have UVB readings on our planet now that are frequently 1,000% or more above what we're being told. It's thwarting the hydrological cycle. It's contaminating everything around the globe. We have a study of 1,000 whales in 2010 of the most remote places on the planet. Their tissue was tested for heavy metals, and the report stated that they contained, all of them, jaw-dropping levels of aluminum in their tissues. Now, I mean, this should alarm everybody. This means there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide. And now, as of 2 weeks ago, we have one of the top researchers in the world from MIT telling us right now, she went out on a limb to do this, but I salute her for her courage, that on the current trajectory, within 10 years, 1 out of 2 children will have autism. 1 out of 2. We've already seen a 10,000% increase from 75 to 2014, from 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 50, and now we're talking about 1 in 2 in the next 10 years, and how many of us will be thinking clearly? Just because a child doesn't have a diagnosis of autism doesn't mean that child is healthy. They cannot be healthy. None of us can be healthy. Alzheimer's, dementia, now we're looking at 1 in 3 seniors in the U.S. dies with one or both of those ailments, not dies from it, but dies with it. We are all breathing this stuff in. It's compromising our health. It's compromising our ability to think. It's poisoning our soils. It's disrupting our weather patterns. And this is not even taking into account the likely biological testing that's going on top of all these heavy metals. And these heavy metals are toxic by themselves, as most people know. They know aluminum's toxic. They know barium's toxic. But when you blend these metals together, you have synergistic toxicity. In the case of aluminum and mercury, the toxicity is escalated as much as 10,000% when those two metals are combined. So the lethality of this mix cannot be overstated. It is literally an all-out assault on all of us, and they know, the power structure knows exactly how much danger they would be in if the public really found out. I have an article called Dialogue with the Geoengineering Insider. It's posted on geoengineeringwatch.org, and that individual from a government lab, and our dialogue is posted there, word for word. He stated if the public truly found out about these programs, they would seek out those who are responsible and hang them or shoot them in front of a firing squad. That's exactly what his words were. And I know who this person is. I recognize his name from documents. I had a single conversation with him, which I recorded. I kept him anonymous, as I stated I would. So the bottom line is, geoengineering is the issue. Climate engineering is the all-out assault, and it's much more than climate engineering, as you correctly stated. I mean, this is really needs to be looked at in a very dire sense. This is an all-out assault against everything we hold dear. But this issue will decide our collective futures if we do not deal with it. It's that simple.
Well, more powerful words have probably never been said on this broadcast, and I can't thank you enough for your time, Dane. You mentioned autism. For those of us who are concerned about the vaccine issue, we know that the incidence of autism has gone from 1 in 10,000 down to about 1 in 54 boys. I think mainly it affects boys, but add to that.
It affects both, yes. But the boy statistic is higher, Sean, but it's certainly affecting both sexes. There's just a higher incidence with males.
Yes, and the metals in the spraying that you cite, this synergistic toxicity, is horrifying, because it really gives me the opportunity to come full circle when I stated earlier that I believe that the spraying has probably dual or multiple purposes, weather modification and some perhaps very sinister applications in human beings as they introduce these metals into our bodies against our will. It's all quite horrifying, and thank God we have somebody like Dane Wigington out there with his site, geoengineeringwatch.org, trying his level best to spread the word, inform others. And I'm not sure how we take this thing back, Dane. I'm really not sure. I guess I should end this by asking, what is your forecast for California if this continues?
They can turn California into a desert, and we are on that path as we speak. If these programs continue much longer, the boreal forests are dying around the globe. And instead of being a carbon sink and absorbing carbon, they're now a carbon source. And the forests are dying everywhere, Sean. The boreal forests are. In fact, Siberia is losing about 100 million acres a year to forest fire. Everybody sees the amount of fires that are happening along the Pacific West Coast. So we are literally burning to the ground. The temperatures here have been meteorologically off the charts. California, we're seeing temperature falsifications also. We're seeing a falsification to the downside of about 4.6 degrees in Northern California. That's as measured by a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists whom I know. So not only are the temperatures, even with what they are reporting, off the charts, we see that the temperatures will be about 4.6 degrees higher if they were being reported accurately. So they are literally burning California to the ground, along with a lot of other areas along the West Coast. And if they continue this, again, this source of food, as you correctly stated, will be decimated beyond repair. We see excavators tearing out orchards already at this point. And people, one more aspect, Sean, that people ask, if this was really going on, why wouldn't agencies be reporting it? The people convince themselves that if this was really happening, they would hear from air quality, they would hear from EPA. This is nonsense. The whole system has been designed not to show this contamination. California State Water Quality stopped testing for aluminum in the water in 2002. California Department of Fish and Game stopped testing for aluminum in runoff water, even though they test for 130 plus other elements. So California air quality tests for, at best, Sean, PM10 or PM2.5. 10 micron or 2.5 micron, at best 2.5 micron. The particles we're talking about being dispersed are exponentially smaller. They go virtually under the radar. I've been in high-level EPA meetings in Sacramento, 5 top EPA reps, closed-door meeting. This meeting was arranged by a congressional representative, told to my face that the system is rigged, that they are mandated to test for combustion particulates only. The rest of their sample goes out the window. They don't care what's in that sample. And I asked the question, if there was depleted uranium in that sample, would you care? No, it's not on our list of what we test for. So we have a system that's been designed from top to bottom not to show this material, even though there's a mountain of it raining down on us. So much material, it's changing forest floor pHs. We've seen aquatic insect life decline in Northern California. As measured by a Forest Service biologist, we've seen a 90% aquatic and terrestrial insect life decline in 10 years. 90%. Species extinction rate today, 200 species of plant and animal going extinct every single day. That's 10,000 times background rate. That's 1,000,000% of normal. We're in the 6th great mass extinction right now, right here today. There's no hiding this for much longer. So people need to understand whatever happens with societal collapse that's probably imminent from a number of different directions, if we have a planet that cannot support life, if the Earth's life support systems have been so horrifically damaged that we cannot grow our own food, that the whole ecosystem is imploding, we have no chance. No chance. And there is no greater single assault against all life on Earth than global climate engineering, period.
Yeah, and you say we have a system designed not to show us, and nothing could be more true. And another great example of that is World Trade Center 7 and the collapse of that building on 9/11. People say, if 9/11 was a false flag operation of some sort, why would the media not cover it? Why would they not show us? Why would they not talk about it? Well, they don't show World Trade Center 7 because I agree with you. We have a system designed not to show us, not to share truth. We have a media that's designed to control us. And to come full circle on the 9/11 issue, let's talk about your radio show. I know that you're having Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth on your show, which is terrific. We love Richard Gage.
Actually, Richard will be on my show today, and I salute and so regard his tenacity with this issue. And I think there's a very strong parallel between, for example, Building 7 collapsing and how incredibly obvious that is as a demolition. Anybody who could buy the official story that Building 7 collapsed at free fall speed because of some furniture burning in the first floor, it's absolutely ludicrous. So those who will buy that story are the same people that will look in the sky and deny the grid patterns that we see, deny the lack of blue sky that we see. And by the way, for those listening, Sean, there is much, much more to climate engineering than just the horizon-to-horizon trails. If you don't see blue sky and you don't see white clouds, and you see this sort of silvery, white, cobweb-looking clouds, no blue sky, you're seeing an atmosphere saturated with particulates. So the same people that can't recognize the 9/11 issue are also convincing themselves there's nothing wrong in the sky, and that kind of denial needs to go. It needs to go now because we don't have a lot of time. I stress this to people. As I mentioned earlier, The climate engineering has triggered feedback loops in the climate that now are putting all life on Earth at risk. And there are other factors. I'm not stating there's not other anthropogenic factors affecting the climate. There absolutely are. But mathematically, the single greatest is climate engineering. The methane issue in the Arctic alone, I encourage people to Google Arctic methane emergency. There's enough methane in the Laptev Sea of the Arctic to cause a Permian-style mass extinction 100 times over, and that methane is starting to release now. And this is where the climate engineering becomes ever more insane. So not only have they helped to trigger this event, they're ramping up the climate engineering to even higher levels in an attempt to trying to hide the damage already done. And now, with the methane saturating the atmosphere, we have Project Alamo and Project Lucy, both acronyms for using these ionosphere heaters, which we described earlier, in a desperate attempt to microwave the atmosphere with opposing frequencies to try to degrade some of the methane that's saturating the atmosphere, which the climate engineering programs helped to release in the first place. This is insanity heaped on top of insanity, heaped on top of insanity. We are on track for what's called Venus syndrome. I encourage your listeners to look that one up. The gravity of what we face, again, is very, very immediate. Can't stress that enough. Climate engineering is the issue we have to deal with. We have to deal with this issue, or nothing else will matter.
Well, friends, I just want to say one thing. When I mentioned Building 7 and Richard Gage, those who want to now demonize Dane Wigington will use that as the turd in the punch bowl to say, oh, Dane Wigington is a truther. Well, guess what? That doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work with this informed, incredibly intellectual, caring audience, and it doesn't work with many people around the world as people are waking up to what false flag terror is and how governments use it. So that card doesn't work anymore. Those people just marginalize themselves and expose themselves as the mockingbirds they are. So as we wrap up, I want to call everyone's attention to Dane's excellent website, geoengineeringwatch.org. Please visit it, bookmark it. And Dane, is there anything people can do to get involved to make a difference here?
Yes, there's a tremendous amount, and everybody is needed in this fight. If people learn enough about this issue, not to become experts, but to just be able to answer a few basic questions, if they arm themselves with credible data, that's extremely important. Have something credible to pass on to those who you're trying to introduce the subject. That can be as simple as a flyer. We have a number of flyers on the Geoengineering Watch site you can download and print for free. And this is much more effective than going out in the street and pointing at the sky and ranting. This puts people's defenses up. Have something credible to pass on to them from your own home computer. People can find groups, organizations, and individuals that would care if they only knew this was going on. We have a link called the Flaming Arrow link. It's a prepackaged introduction letter with a number of important informational links that's easy to send out to these groups, organizations, and individuals to give them a heads up on these programs, to start a spot fire of awareness, if you will. So there's so much that every one of us can do, even from in front of our own home computer, every single day to help raise this issue to critical mass. If we could reach critical mass, there will be a shockwave around the globe as populations realize that not only are they expendable, they've been a part of a grand and lethal experiment without their knowledge or consent, and in many ways they are actually a liability to the power structure. And there's no dismissing the fact that we have been all a part of this lethal experiment. So every one of us matters in this fight, Sean. Everyone can do a tremendous amount of good from their own home computer or with their own circle of friends. Hold a viewing with a film, pass out flyers, help us to sound the alarm. Once we reach critical mass, the dominoes with these programs will begin to fall as those participating and their families who know they're participating start to refuse to be a part of these programs. We're already seeing that happen in a few arenas. So if we just could reach critical mass with everybody pulling together, we will see these programs, I believe, curbed by the very people who are carrying them out right now who don't know the magnitude of what they're doing.
Well, absolutely. It humbles me to be able to have guests on like you, Dane. I feel so fortunate and so blessed to be able to speak with so many intelligent, caring, wonderful human beings, people still equipped with empathy. Those who control us, those who want to dehumanize and harm humanity, clearly have lost their humanity and have clearly lost their empathy to the degree it makes us wonder if they're human at all. And the work you're doing, again, it moved me. It's moving me to action. And I want to encourage everybody who's listening, please, I don't normally do this, hit the like button. Share this with others. borrow it, rip it, redigitize it, put it up on your own YouTube channel. Send it out. Whatever you guys want to do to spread this information far and wide, I authorize it. Take the copyright on this one, make it your own. I want this information out there, and I cannot thank all of you enough for listening and caring enough to do what I just said. Share this with others. At this point, it's the only chance we have. It's the only thing we have left, is our right to free speech, our right to inform our brothers and sisters and those who aren't awake. We've got to wake up the sheeple, and I know that's a hell of a difficult job. But Dane, you're certainly doing your part. Again, can you call out your website for everybody?
Our website is geoengineeringwatch.org. And the same gratitude back toward you, Sean. Without people of courage with a voice that can be heard like yours, we would not be able to get the word out. So my gratitude toward you as well, my friend.
Okay, thank you, sir. And tell us how people can listen to your internet radio program. That sounds really interesting.
They can reach that at geoengineeringwatch.org in the left tool column, or they can Google Geoengineering Watch Radio. They'll find the links as well. And it's every Saturday from 12 to 1, and we discuss the updates on issues, everything that we've just gone over every week.
Is that 12 to 1 Pacific time?
12 to 1 Pacific Standard Time, yes.
Okay, and so for archival purposes, if people missed the one that's happening today with Richard Gage, will they be able to find that and listen to like an MP3?
Absolutely. That will be posted on Geoengineering Watch, or they can Google that. But we do post all the shows are linked and archived on the front page of geoengineeringwatch.org.
Okay. Well, Dane, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a delight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. And guys, thank you so much for listening and sharing this information with others. If you're listening to this broadcast, you are the last line in the defense of humanity. Thank you for listening and sharing. Thanks for checking us out at sgtreport.com and the Liberty Mill. We love you. Have a great week.